Lily had always been a woman of strength, pride, and unyielding determination. In her early 20s, she had built a reputation for herself as an ambitious and capable woman, earning respect in her career as a cosmetic saleswoman. She thrived on the challenges life threw her way, always stepping up to meet expectations, whether in her professional life or as a wife. But now, at 7 months pregnant, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about herself, about her marriage, and about her future. Pregnancy, she soon learned, was not just a journey of physical change, but of deep emotional shifts. The woman who had once prided herself on managing everything with grace and efficiency now found herself staggering beneath the weight of it all. Her body, once a symbol of strength and vitality, was now heavy with the burden of carrying new life. Every movement, every task seemed to require more effort than it should. She had expected the pregnancy to be tough, but she never imagined it would erode her sense of self the way it had. It was supposed to be a simple errand, just a quick run to the grocery store to pick up a few items for dinner. But as she walked through the aisles, pushing her cart, Lily felt a wave of dizziness take over her body. At first, she brushed it off, chalking it up to the exhaustion she had been feeling lately. She had always been a little dizzy, a little lightheaded, but she pushed through it. That's what she always did, pushed through. But this time, her body wouldn't cooperate. As she reached for a can of beans on the top shelf, her vision blurred and she swayed. The dizziness intensified, and before she could catch herself, everything around her spun out of control. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold tile floor, her body crumpling like a rag doll. For a moment, everything was dark, and then the sounds of the store, shuffling feet, murmured voices, brought her back to reality. The hospital was sterile and cold, the beeping of machines, a harsh reminder of how fragile life could be. Lily's mind raced, filled with worry and fear. Had she hurt the baby? Was everything going to be okay? She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed James's number. She needed him now, more than ever. But the moment he picked up, her heart sank. "Why do you always collapse when I need you?" James's voice pierced through the phone, cold and accusing. It wasn't a question filled with concern. There was no trace of panic, no sound of worry in his tone, just frustration, just anger. "We're here starving, waiting for your terrible cooking, and you're off relaxing in the hospital. I'm done. I'm going out to eat with my parents." Lily's world tilted on its axis. She had never felt so alone. There she was, in a hospital bed, barely clinging to consciousness, with her body fighting against itself, and all he could think about was how inconvenienced he was by her absence. The words stung in a way that no physical injury could. They were a reminder of something she had long suspected, that she was in this alone, that James was no longer the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had promised to stand by her through thick and thin. Instead, he was a stranger, distant, cold, and unsympathetic. The silence that followed his words was suffocating. Lily struggled to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. Her body was weary, her spirit shattered. She thought back to the early days of their marriage, to the romantic promises they had made to each other. She had always believed in love's power to overcome anything. But now, love felt like a distant memory, a fleeting notion that had slipped through her fingers as easily as sand. Her mind reeled with memories of the life they had built together, the long nights spent talking about their future, the dreams of raising a family, of being a team, partners in every sense of the word. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had unraveled. The stress of pregnancy had exposed the cracks in their relationship, cracks that had been there long before Lily's growing belly had become a part of their lives. It wasn't just the pregnancy that had changed things. It was the months of neglect, the subtle criticisms, the absence of kindness. It was the way James had retreated into himself, leaving Lily to face the mounting pressures of her changing body, her emotional upheaval, and the expectations of their families, all on her own. Lily's thoughts wandered to the time when she had felt the most alive, the most fulfilled. back when she was a successful cosmetic salesperson, when her career was everything to her. She had thrived on the energy of the job, the recognition, the satisfaction of meeting her goals and exceeding expectations. She had felt empowered, like she could conquer anything. But that was before pregnancy, before her body had betrayed her, before she had to make the difficult decision to leave her job behind to protect the baby she was carrying. It had been a hard choice, but it was one she had made for the future, for their family. And yet, the moment she stepped away from her career, she felt the shift in her relationship with James. What had once been a partnership built on love, respect, and shared ambitions had morphed into something entirely different. It wasn't the pregnancy that had caused this. No, the pregnancy was just the catalyst. It was the weight of unmet expectations, the lack of support, and the growing sense of isolation that had poisoned their connection. James no longer seemed to see her as the woman he had fallen in love with. He saw her as weak, as incapable, as a disappointment. He mocked her attempts to do even the simplest things. "Where's my lunch?" he would ask, only to scoff at the sandwiches she managed to prepare for him. The simple task of feeding him, of fulfilling his basic needs, had become a point of ridicule. And then there was the pregnancy itself. James's dismissive attitude toward her struggles was perhaps the most painful of all. "Pregnancy isn't an illness," he would say, his words sharp and demeaning, as if what she was going through, her constant fatigue, the physical discomfort, the emotional roller coaster, was something she should simply ignore. As if her body's rebellion against the very life she was nurturing inside of her was something to be ashamed of. Every day felt like a battle against her body, against her emotions, and against the mounting pressure to meet the expectations of a marriage that no longer felt like her own. She would have moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if maybe she was just imagining it all, if maybe she was overreacting, if maybe James was just stressed too. But deep down, she knew. She knew that this wasn't just a phase, that this wasn't just a moment of tension in their relationship. It was something deeper, something more profound, something that had been building for a long time. The final straw came when her in-laws began to show up unannounced, adding to the pressure she was already under. They would arrive at their home, criticize the state of the house, question her ability to manage things, and demand her attention as if she were supposed to be on call for their every whim. Lily would try to prepare something for them, but no matter what she did, it was never good enough. And every time, James sided with them, adding insult to injury. He never once stood up for her, never once defended her. All of this, the isolation, the criticism, the lack of support, had taken its toll on Lily. She had spent so much time trying to be everything to everyone, trying to meet everyone's needs, trying to fulfill the roles that were expected of her. But now, as she lay in that hospital bed, she realized something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She couldn't keep fighting a battle that no one else even seemed to notice. Her collapse in the grocery store was not just a physical breakdown. It was the breaking point of everything that had been building for months. The exhaustion, the isolation, the emotional strain. It had all culminated in this moment. And as she lay there, in that sterile hospital room, she knew that something had to give. She had to make a choice to stop sacrificing herself for a marriage that no longer felt like home, a choice to fight for her own well-being and the well-being of her child. But in that moment, as she looked at her phone and heard the cold words of her husband, Lily realized something even more powerful. She didn't need to be everything to everyone anymore. She only needed to be enough for herself. And that realization would be the catalyst for everything that followed. Lily had always believed that the key to a successful relationship was clear communication. She was someone who could express her thoughts and feelings, someone who thrived in environments where expectations were laid out and understood. Yet, as she journeyed deeper into her pregnancy, she began to realize that the absence of clear communication with her husband, James, was eroding the foundation of their marriage. In the early days of their relationship, James had been supportive, attentive, and deeply caring. They had shared dreams of building a future together, a future that included their own family. But as Lily's pregnancy progressed, she found herself carrying not just the physical weight of a child, but the unspoken weight of her husband's growing resentment and disappointment. What had once been a partnership was now beginning to feel like a battle where she fought not just for herself, but for the man she had once loved, who seemed increasingly distant. The unspoken expectations from James were suffocating. At first, they had been small things. The way he would glance at the kitchen when he came home from work, as if he were silently judging the state of the house. He never said anything outright, but she could feel his disapproval in the way he would sigh when he walked in, the way he would comment on how much time she spent resting. His subtle critiques weighed heavily on her, and the pressure mounted each day. "Where's my lunch?" he would ask, his voice casual but pointed, as though she were supposed to drop everything and cater to his every need, despite the toll her pregnancy was taking on her body. Lily would scramble to prepare something quick, even though she had barely enough energy to stand, let alone cook. When the sandwiches were ready, he would mock her efforts, calling them mediocre, as if she hadn't tried her best. The words stung deeply, more than he could ever understand. She wasn't just preparing food, she was trying to hold on to some semblance of normalcy in a world that was rapidly changing around her. Her mind swirled with the emotional exhaustion of it all. She had given up her career, her sense of independence, to focus on the pregnancy, to create a home for their child, to give James the family he wanted. But all she received in return was disappointment, criticism, and a sense of being constantly scrutinized. Her sacrifices seemed to go unnoticed, overshadowed by the quiet but incessant demands from James. He never asked how she was feeling, never offered support when she was overwhelmed. Instead, his expectations grew, and she was expected to meet them without question, without complaint. The most painful part of this was the realization that James no longer saw her as the strong, capable woman she had been. He saw her as weak, as someone who couldn't even meet the most basic expectations of being a wife. Pregnancy, which should have been a time for nurturing and support, had become a test of endurance, a test that she was beginning to fail in his eyes. And with each day that passed, the weight of his silent judgment grew heavier. The pregnancy itself was taking its toll on Lily in ways she hadn't anticipated. The physical changes were one thing, but the emotional strain was far more overwhelming. There were days when she could hardly get out of bed, days when her body felt as though it were betraying her. But it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that wore her down. It was the constant, unspoken pressure to be everything James expected her to be. James had always been ambitious, a man who prided himself on his career, his achievements, and his ability to take care of things. But as Lily's pregnancy progressed, he seemed to retreat further into himself, becoming more and more focused on his own needs and frustrations. Lily had tried to convince herself that he was just stressed. His job had become more demanding, and he had recently taken on a mentorship role at work. She kept telling herself that once the baby came, everything would go back to normal. But the more she tried to convince herself, the more she felt the growing distance between them. He no longer came to doctor's appointments with her, no longer offered to help around the house. The responsibilities that they had once shared seemed to fall solely on her shoulders. It wasn't just the physical labor of preparing meals and keeping the house tidy. It was the emotional labor, being the one to hold it all together, to maintain a sense of calm when everything was unraveling around her. She was supposed to be the strong one, the one who could handle it all. But no one was asking how she was doing. No one was checking in on her, and no one seemed to notice the toll it was taking on her. And then there were the in-laws. They had always been a source of tension in the marriage, but now their presence was like a shadow hanging over her. They showed up unannounced, their critical eyes always scanning the house, questioning her ability to manage everything. The house wasn't clean enough, the meals weren't good enough, and somehow Lily wasn't doing enough. No matter what she did, it was never enough for them. And James, instead of standing by her, sided with them, offering no defense, no comfort. The silence between them spoke volumes. She wasn't just failing in the eyes of her husband, she was failing in the eyes of everyone around her. In moments of exhaustion, Lily would cry herself to sleep, her body aching, her heart heavy with the weight of it all. She wanted to scream, to demand that someone see her, that someone acknowledge the pain she was in. But instead, she kept quiet. She kept pushing forward, pretending everything was fine, because that's what she was supposed to do. That's what everyone expected of her. But the strain was beginning to break her. She was becoming a shell of the woman she had once been, constantly giving, constantly sacrificing, with nothing left for herself. The pressure to be everything, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect homemaker, was suffocating her. She had no space to breathe, no space to be herself. All she had was the unspoken expectation that she would continue to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, even though she was barely able to stand. Lily's internal battle was one she fought in silence. No one saw the tears she shed in the moments when she felt completely alone, even though she was surrounded by people. No one saw the toll that pregnancy was taking on her body, on her spirit. All they saw was what they expected her to be: the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect homemaker. But no one seemed to notice that Lily was breaking piece by piece. The unspoken expectations from James, from her in-laws, from society, were too much for her to bear. She wasn't just fighting for her own well-being anymore. She was fighting for her sense of self, for her dignity, for the woman she used to be. She was trying to hold on to the remnants of the life she had built, but with each passing day, it was becoming more and more difficult. In the quiet of her heart, Lily knew something had to change. She couldn't keep going like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that she was okay, when she was falling apart inside. The emotional exhaustion was taking its toll, and she realized that if she didn't make a change, if she didn't start standing up for herself, she would lose herself completely. But for now, she continued to push forward, pretending, smiling through the pain, and carrying the weight of it all. Because that's what everyone expected her to do. And for a long time, that had been enough. But deep down, she knew that it wouldn't be for much longer. The breaking point was coming, and when it did, she would have to make a choice: to continue bearing the weight of everyone's expectations, or to set herself free. The days in the hospital felt like an eternity to Lily. The sterile white walls and the rhythmic beeping of machines seemed to mock her isolation, her sense of despair. She lay there, exhausted, emotionally drained, and alone. Her body ached from the strain of her pregnancy, and her mind was consumed with a swirling mix of thoughts, fears, and questions. She couldn't stop thinking about her husband, James, and the crushing weight of his indifference, his cold words, his lack of empathy. They echoed in her mind, playing over and over again, as if they were the soundtrack of her life now. Was this the life she had to look forward to? A future of neglect, criticism, and isolation. The hospital room was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of nurses' feet and the hum of the machines that monitored her and the baby's vital signs. It was in this quiet, oppressive space that Lily began to feel the full weight of everything that had been building up. It wasn't just the pregnancy, it was the broken marriage, the lack of support, the isolation from the people she had once believed would stand by her. Every passing moment felt like a reminder of how much she had lost. But then, as she stared blankly at the ceiling, wondering how she had ended up in this place, something unexpected happened. A voice, soft yet familiar, broke through the fog of her despair. "Lily?" Lily turned her head, her vision slightly blurry from the exhaustion and the tears that had gathered in her eyes. Standing at the doorway was Helen, a face she hadn't seen in years, but one she recognized instantly. "Helen!" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Helen had been a regular customer when Lily worked as a cosmetic salesperson. At first, their relationship had been purely professional, but over time, a friendship had blossomed. Helen had become someone Lily could confide in, someone who, like her, had navigated the challenges of life and relationships. But it wasn't just that. Helen had become a symbol of a life that Lily had once dreamed of: independent, confident, and strong. She had gone through her own struggles, losing confidence after a painful divorce, but had rebuilt herself from the ground up. When Lily thought of Helen, she thought of resilience. Helen smiled at her, but there was a sadness in her eyes, an understanding that only someone who had experienced their own hardships could possess. She stepped into the room and gently placed a hand on Lily's, offering the comfort that Lily had longed for, but had never received from her own husband. "How are you holding up?" Helen asked softly, sitting by the bed. Her voice was warm, genuine, and filled with the kind of empathy Lily had almost forgotten existed. Lily let out a shaky breath, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know anymore. I just feel so lost. I never thought it would be like this." She paused, her voice faltering. "I thought I had it all figured out. I thought this would be the most beautiful time of my life. But it's falling apart, Helen. I don't know what to do." Helen's expression softened. She didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix everything with words. Instead, she simply listened, letting Lily speak her truth, unfiltered and raw. Helen had always been the kind of person who understood that sometimes there was nothing to say, only a need to be heard. Lily looked at Helen, feeling a flood of emotions. She felt relief, but also a pang of guilt. She had shut herself off from so many people in her life, and here was Helen, someone she hadn't seen in years, offering her a lifeline when she needed it most. She had never realized how much she had missed this kindness, this understanding. "Helen, I don't know how to fix things. I don't know how to go back to what we had. James, he's not the man I married. I don't even know who he is anymore." Lily's voice trembled, and the weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating her. Helen nodded, her gaze compassionate yet knowing. "Sometimes, Lily, people change. Sometimes they lose themselves, and it's not because of anything you've done. You can't carry the weight of someone else's journey. You can't fix him. You can only choose what's best for you." Lily's heart ached at Helen's words. She had always believed in the power of love, in the idea that love could heal, could change things. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if that love was enough. She felt like she had given everything to James, only to be left with nothing. But Helen's words planted a seed of clarity, a glimmer of understanding that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting for something that no longer existed. Helen didn't let the conversation end there. "Lily, I know things feel hopeless right now, but I also know that you're stronger than you think. You've been through so much, and you've kept going. You're still here, still fighting, and that's something worth celebrating." Lily looked at Helen, feeling a small spark of hope flicker within her. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was telling her she was strong. Someone was acknowledging the fight she had been waging inside herself, the quiet battle she had been fighting every day, even when no one else saw it. And then, Helen did something that changed everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of keys. "I have a place, a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it's yours if you want it. You can come stay with me. You don't have to go back to that toxic situation. You don't have to go back to him." Lily's breath caught in her throat. "What? Helen, I couldn't possibly take your apartment. I don't even know how to repay you." Helen smiled softly, her eyes filled with kindness. "You don't need to repay me, Lily. You don't owe me anything. This is about you, about giving you the chance to start over. You've been through so much, and you deserve peace. You deserve a space where you can breathe, where you can figure out what's next for you and your baby. I'm here for you, no matter what." The words settled deep within Lily's heart, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. The walls she had constructed out of fear, out of pain, out of the belief that she was alone in this. But here was Helen, a woman she hadn't seen in years, offering her everything she needed without hesitation. It was the kind of support Lily had longed for, but had never known how to ask for. It was the kindness of someone who had been there before, someone who knew that sometimes all you needed was someone to say, You don't have to do this alone." Lily's heart swelled with gratitude, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel it fully. She had been living in a state of emotional paralysis, caught between the love she had once shared with James and the reality of what their relationship had become. But now, with Helen's offer, a door had opened. A door to something new, to something that wasn't defined by the pain of the past, but by the hope of the future. "I'll take it," Lily said softly, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I'll come. I'll stay with you." Helen's eyes brightened, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're making the right choice, Lily. You're choosing yourself, and that's the most important thing." And in that moment, Lily realized something profound. It wasn't just the apartment that Helen was offering. It was a chance at a new beginning. It was the possibility of healing, of moving forward, of reclaiming her life. For so long, she had been trapped in the shadows of her own fears, her own doubts. But with Helen's unexpected kindness, she could see the light again. And it was brighter than she had ever imagined. Lily had spent years suppressing her own needs and desires, convinced that love, loyalty, and sacrifice were the pillars upon which her marriage was built. She had given everything to James, her career, her dreams, her independence, all in the name of creating the perfect life for them as a couple. But as the months passed and the emotional distance between them grew, Lily began to see the cracks in the foundation of their marriage, cracks that had long been hidden beneath the surface. The weight of her sacrifices, her unspoken pain, and the emotional neglect she had endured for so long had finally taken its toll. Now, as she sat in the small apartment that Helen had so generously offered, Lily was confronted with a harsh truth. She had lost herself. She had been so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, that she had neglected the one person who mattered most: herself. The realization hit her with a force she couldn't ignore. In her attempt to make everything work, to make everyone happy, she had lost touch with her own identity. She had allowed herself to fade into the background of her own life. But in the quiet of the apartment, as she looked out the window and watched the sun set over the city, Lily felt a shift within her. She wasn't just a passive observer of her life anymore. She was the one who could take control, who could rewrite her story. For the first time in a long while, Lily allowed herself to imagine a future that was hers, and hers alone. The future she had envisioned before James had become a shadow of the man she once loved. The future that wasn't defined by the expectations of others, but by her own desires, her own dreams. The decision to leave James had been a painful one, but it had also been a liberating one. The weight of the years of emotional neglect, the constant criticism, and the quiet sense of betrayal had been lifted off her shoulders the moment she stepped away from that life. The space that had been created by her decision wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. For the first time in months, Lily felt like she could breathe again. The walls that had been closing in on her slowly started to open up, and in the light that filtered through those cracks, Lily saw a version of herself she hadn't recognized in years. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to thrive. Her body still carried the physical weight of pregnancy, but her spirit felt lighter, freer than it had in months. She could hear her own voice again, the one that had been drowned out by the noise of criticism, the weight of others' expectations, and as she allowed herself to listen to that voice, Lily began to realize that reclaiming control wasn't just about leaving James. It was about reclaiming the parts of herself she had lost in the process. It wasn't an easy journey. Every day, Lily faced moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she had made the right choice. She had spent years building a life with James, and letting go of that life meant acknowledging the immense loss, the grief that came with the end of a chapter she had once believed in so fiercely. But with each passing day, Lily grew more certain of the path she was on. The woman who had been afraid to speak up, afraid to set boundaries, was beginning to emerge once again. Her relationship with her son became a focal point of this transformation. The bond she had with her baby, the connection she felt deep in her bones, reminded her every day of the strength she had within her. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the future she wanted for her child. She wanted to give him more than a life filled with tension, resentment, and silent suffering. She wanted him to know that love was not about sacrifice, not about losing oneself in the name of someone else's happiness. She wanted him to grow up knowing that it was possible to love deeply without losing who you were along the way. The decision to embrace this new beginning wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of deep loneliness, moments when the weight of being a single mother seemed unbearable. The questions about what the future would look like, how she would manage to navigate the world on her own, often kept her up at night. But as she moved through those moments, Lily realized that the strength she had been seeking outside of herself had always been inside her. She didn't need James's validation, nor did she need anyone else's approval. She had the power to create a life that was hers, one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Lily began to rebuild. She reconnected with old friends, women who had once been her support system, but whom she had distanced herself from during the years of her marriage. They had seen the changes in her before she had, and they welcomed her back with open arms, reminding her of the vibrant, independent woman she had once been. They celebrated her decision to leave James, not with judgment, but with support, as if they too had been waiting for her to remember who she was. Helen, too, was a constant source of encouragement. She had become Lily's anchor, the friend who held space for her to grieve, to heal, and to grow. She had seen Lily at her lowest, and now she was seeing her begin to rise again. Helen's belief in Lily's strength was unwavering, and that belief became a lifeline Lily clung to in moments when she doubted herself. It was Helen who helped her begin to think about her future in practical terms. What did Lily want out of life now that she was free from the constraints of her past? What dreams had she buried in favor of keeping her marriage intact? For the first time in years, Lily allowed herself to dream again. She thought about returning to work, about rekindling her passion for cosmetics, about creating a life that was both independent and fulfilling. It was a slow process, but every small step she took toward that future felt like a victory. The changes were not just external, either. Lily had to confront the deep emotional wounds left by her marriage, the way James's indifference had chipped away at her self-worth. She had to forgive herself for the ways she had allowed herself to be diminished, for the moments when she had allowed love to become a prison rather than a source of joy. Healing from that kind of emotional trauma wasn't something that could happen overnight, but each day, as she faced the truth of her past and the possibilities of her future, Lily found herself becoming more and more resilient. She wasn't just reclaiming control of her life, she was reclaiming control of her own happiness. One of the most profound moments in this journey came when Lily realized that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else. It didn't depend on James's approval, nor did it depend on her ability to meet the expectations of those around her. It depended solely on her ability to trust herself, to trust that she had the strength to build a future that was truly her own. She was no longer waiting for someone else to validate her worth. She was creating her own worth. In the end, it was this realization that brought Lily the peace she had long been searching for. She had reclaimed control, not just of her circumstances, but of her life. And in doing so, she had created a future that was brighter, fuller, and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined. She was no longer the woman she had been, the one who had lived in the shadows of others' expectations. She was a woman who had found her own light, her own path, and it was a path she would walk with her head held high, knowing that no matter what came next, she had the strength to face it. Lily had always imagined that her future would be shaped by the life she built with James. She had once believed that their love was a bond that would carry them through everything, through the challenges of raising a family, through the ups and downs of their careers, through the ebb and flow of life. But as she sat in the quiet of the apartment Helen had so kindly provided, she realized something profound. The future she had once envisioned, the future that had seemed so secure, was no longer hers to claim. In its place was something new, something unfamiliar, but filled with possibility. For the first time in months, Lily could see the horizon stretching out before her, bright with hope and possibility. It wasn't just the physical distance between her and the life she had left behind. It was the emotional space she had carved out for herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to thrive. The pain, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of loss, all of that was still there, lingering beneath the surface, but it no longer defined her. She had found something more important: her own strength. The apartment had become her sanctuary. It was small, but it was hers. It was a place where she could rest, where she could finally breathe without the weight of expectation crushing her every movement. It was a space that allowed her to reconnect with herself, to rediscover the parts of her that had been buried under the rubble of her failed marriage. The silence in the apartment wasn't oppressive, it was peaceful. It was the silence of a fresh start, of the possibility to create something new, something that was entirely her own. Lily's body still bore the marks of pregnancy, but her spirit had started to heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. The exhaustion she had once felt, both physical and emotional, was slowly ebbing away. There were still hard days, days when the weight of everything felt too much to bear. But now she knew that those days didn't define her. They were just moments in a larger journey, moments that she would move through, just as she had moved through everything else. The most significant change had come from within. For so long, Lily had been a prisoner of her own fears. Fear of being alone, fear of making the wrong choices, fear of disappointing others. But now, she was beginning to realize that fear had held her back for too long. It had kept her tethered to a life that wasn't truly hers, a life that had never allowed her to be fully herself. She had spent so much of her energy trying to please James, trying to meet the expectations of everyone around her, that she had forgotten what it meant to live for herself. Lily thought often about her son, the child she was carrying. Every decision she made now, every step she took, was for him. He was the reason she had stayed in the marriage for as long as she had, the reason she had tried to make it work, even when everything inside her told her it was falling apart. She wanted to protect him from the pain she had endured, and that desire to protect him fueled her every move. In those quiet moments, Lily would place her hands on her growing belly and think about the future they would share. She imagined raising her son in a home filled with love, not tension. She pictured him growing up in an environment where kindness and mutual respect were the foundation of every relationship. She wanted him to know that love was not about sacrifice, not about losing yourself for the sake of others. She wanted him to see that it was possible to be kind and loving without losing your own identity in the process. As she looked out the window, watching the world move by, Lily realized that she no longer had to wait for permission to be happy. She had spent so many years looking for validation from James, from her in-laws, from society, but now, she understood that true happiness came from within. It wasn't something that could be given to her by anyone else. It was something she had to claim for herself. Lily had always been independent at her core, but somewhere along the way, she had allowed herself to become dependent on others for her sense of worth. She had allowed her happiness to be dictated by someone else's actions, someone else's feelings. She had believed that her worth was tied to her ability to fulfill the expectations placed on her. But now she knew that her worth was inherent, that it was not dependent on anyone else's approval. One of the hardest things Lily had to confront was the guilt she still carried with her. The guilt of leaving James. The guilt of not being able to make their marriage work. The guilt of not living up to the ideal of a perfect family. But as time passed, she began to see that her guilt was a reflection of the unhealthy beliefs she had held onto for so long. She had been conditioned to believe that her value came from how much she could sacrifice for others, from how well she could meet their needs. But in letting go of that guilt, Lily freed herself from the chains of the past. She no longer needed to carry the burden of others' expectations. She could create her own story now. The decision to leave James had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. It was an act of self-preservation, of reclaiming her own identity, of choosing a future that was filled with love and respect, not just from others, but from herself. Lily knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and times when she felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Lily began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. She started reconnecting with old friends, those who had known her before she had become consumed by the demands of her marriage. She found strength in their support, in the kindness they offered without judgment. She had spent so long living in isolation, but now she felt the warmth of connection again. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that there were people who cared for her, who saw her for who she truly was. Helen continued to be her anchor, offering guidance and support whenever Lily needed it. But more than that, Helen provided a safe space for Lily to rediscover her passions, to remember what it meant to live for herself. With Helen's encouragement, Lily began to think about her future, about the things she had put on hold for so long. She thought about returning to work, about picking up where she had left off in her career, about creating a life that was both independent and fulfilling. One of the most empowering moments for Lily came when she started to think about her son's future. She realized that everything she was doing now, every decision, every step forward, was for him. She wanted him to grow up in an environment where he saw his mother as strong, capable, and independent. She wanted him to know that love was about respect, not sacrifice, that it was possible to create a family built on mutual understanding, not control. As Lily moved forward in her journey, she no longer felt bound by the past. She had made peace with the choices she had made, the mistakes she had endured, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She was no longer defined by her relationship with James. She was defined by her own strength, her own resilience, and her own ability to create a future filled with hope and promise. The future that Lily once thought was lost was now within her reach. It was a future where she could live authentically, where she could love and be loved without losing herself in the process. It was a future that she was building for herself, for her son, and for the life she had always dreamed of. A life filled with purpose, joy, and the freedom to be who she truly was. As she looked out into the future, Lily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had found her way back to herself, and that was the greatest gift she could ever give to herself and to her child. The future was no longer something she feared. It was something she embraced, with open arms, ready to take on whatever came next. Lily's journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of reclaiming one's life in the face of adversity. At the beginning of her story, she was a woman who believed in love, loyalty, and sacrifice, assuming that these ideals could hold her relationship with James together. She had dedicated herself entirely to her marriage, giving up her career, her passions, and even her identity for the sake of creating the perfect life for them as a couple. But as time wore on, she began to realize that her devotion to this ideal had left her in a place of emotional emptiness. James, who once promised to be her partner in every sense of the word, became increasingly cold and distant, offering no support during the most vulnerable time in her life. As her pregnancy progressed, Lily's body and mind began to break under the weight of the unspoken expectations placed on her by James and her in-laws. She was expected to be the perfect wife, mother, and homemaker while carrying the burden of an unhealthy marriage. Her self-worth became tied to meeting everyone else's needs, leaving her feeling isolated and unseen. The collapse in the grocery store marked a turning point in Lily's life, a moment of physical and emotional breakdown that revealed just how much she had sacrificed without receiving the support she so desperately needed. Her husband's cold response only deepened the realization that something had to change. It wasn't until she found unexpected support in Helen, an old friend, that Lily began to see a way out. Helen, who had once been a customer and had experienced her own struggles, became the first person to truly see Lily for who she was, offering her a place to stay and the chance to start over. It was through Helen's compassion and understanding that Lily found the strength to begin reclaiming her life. The decision to leave James was not easy, but it was necessary for her emotional survival. It was a choice to embrace her own needs and desires, to stop living for others and start living for herself. The apartment Helen offered was not just a physical space. It was a symbol of the emotional space Lily needed to heal and rediscover who she truly was. Over time, Lily began to rebuild. She reconnected with friends she had distanced herself from and took the first steps toward rediscovering her career and independence. Her son became the driving force behind her transformation, motivating her to create a life filled with love, respect, and emotional freedom. The path was not without challenges. There were moments of doubt, loneliness, and guilt. But Lily's growing sense of self-worth and her commitment to her own happiness allowed her to face each obstacle with renewed strength. She began to see her life not as a series of sacrifices for others, but as a journey of personal growth, empowerment, and self-discovery. By the end of her story, Lily had reclaimed control over her life. She no longer needed James's validation or approval to feel worthy. She had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Her happiness was not dependent on anyone else. It was something she had to cultivate within herself. Lily's story is one of empowerment, resilience, and the courage to let go of what no longer serves you. She learned that in order to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, you must first learn to live for yourself, without fear, without guilt, and without sacrificing your own identity in the process. The lesson to take away from Lily's story is simple yet profound. Your self-worth should never be tied to the approval or expectations of others. Too often, we find ourselves sacrificing our dreams, our desires, and our very identities for the sake of relationships, family, or societal expectations. But in doing so, we lose sight of who we are and what truly makes us happy. It's crucial to recognize that we are worthy of love, respect, and fulfillment on our own terms. We don't need anyone's permission to take care of ourselves, to pursue our passions, or to walk away from toxic situations that hinder our growth. For those of you watching this story unfold, I hope you can take this lesson and apply it to your own life. Perhaps you've been in a relationship or situation where you've given so much of yourself that you no longer recognize who you are. Maybe you've been living according to other people's expectations and have forgotten to ask yourself what you truly want. If that's the case, it's time to make a change. It's time to start living for yourself. Whether it's in your relationships, your career, or your personal life, know that you have the power to reclaim control. Don't be afraid to set boundaries, to say no, or to walk away from what no longer serves you. You deserve a life filled with love, joy, and fulfillment on your own terms. If Lily's story resonates with you, if you feel inspired to take that first step toward reclaiming your own power, I encourage you to take action today. Start by asking yourself what truly makes you happy and what changes you need to make in order to prioritize your own well-being. Whether it's setting boundaries, pursuing a long-held dream, or letting go of a toxic relationship, know that you have the strength to do it. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this story and the lessons it has brought, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your support motivates me to continue creating content that can inspire, empower, and uplift others. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear about future stories, advice, and content designed to help you on your own journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Together, we can build a community of people who believe in the power of self-love, resilience, and personal growth. Thank you for being part of this journey, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. Subscribe now, and let's continue to grow together.